All right, welcome everybody to another live event from Azimuth Consulting, our Check Your Azimuth, if you will. And today I'm joined by Jeremy Thompson, JT, one of our facilitators and coaches here at Azimuth. And we're going to be talking about organizational health and vitality. And you say, why is that important? Well, JT and I have been working on this concept for a while, and we're really starting to push it out to our clients and potential clients. And it's about looking at the health of your organization just like you would look at the health of your body. You know, we all go to the doctor, and unfortunately, we typically go to the doctor when we're sick or something hurts. And really, if we go to the doctor sooner, we could get ahead of the problem. We could see that our health is going to lead to something that's going to be painful or cause illness later. So, as JT and I were talking over several conversations, why don't we do that in business? And JT, what do you think? Why don't you jump in here and tell me what is the problem? Why don't we check the health of our organizations?
One, I think it's how we view organizations and organizational effectiveness. We tend to focus on the things that, as Covey would say, are urgent and important. So anybody who's running an organization or a business knows that the environment is constantly changing. It's constantly throwing new things at you, and there are always helmet fires that you're having to put out. And so it's very easy. Boyle's law is in effect, and whatever space you have on your calendar is going to get filled with things that seem important and seem like the priority for today. And I think that comes at the expense of having a longer term strategic, more holistic perspective about what the organization is there for, and what we want long term with our organization beyond just being successful today.
No, absolutely. And you mentioned um, some symptoms that was putting out fires and things like that. And organizations have symptoms just like our human body has symptoms, right? Like you mentioned, constantly putting out those fires, not a strategic progress, not something that we plan to get to. High turnover, man, we're seeing this a lot in today's organizations. And our best people are leaving, and we can't find the right people. And we tend to blame, and I know we've heard this over and over. We tend to blame this next generation, right? They don't want to work. They don't have the same work ethic. And if we look back in history, we probably see people said that about us
That's
at
right.
some point, and I think we proved them wrong. But and another thing that pops up in a lot of organizational structures are those silos. I came out of the government after 32 years and in the intelligence community, and let me tell you, we had lots of silos, man, because this is my information. I don't want to share it with anybody. And in a business world, that's catastrophic, right? That's like a cancer that's eating away on the body, and it can create these cultures of disengagement where we think we're moving forward, but we're not. People are just doing busy work and they're not accomplishing or progressing anything. What are some other characteristics or indicators that we've seen or that you've seen in organizations that can be an indicator that they may not be as healthy as they think they are?
Well, I just wanted to build on the idea of the silos. I mean, we both have backgrounds in the military, and mine probably more recently. But the traditional Napoleonic staff structure is built in silos. It's vertical. It's built for
Mhm.
vertical alignment and functional alignment. And I know that in military circles, we've talked about how can we build some of that horizontal cohesion. And I know even at one point, I think General Mattis tried to go to a flattened, more cross-functional staff, and it turned out that it didn't work well because nobody else did it, and so there were some
Right.
issues with the ability to coordinate externally, but the reality of having that cohesion both horizontally and vertically is it's baked into our structures. So how do we find ways to cross those boundaries either directly or conceptually, in terms of shared purpose and culture and shared strategy, then that can drive you to say, how do I support the bigger picture? And then that cross pollination happens naturally, and that's built into the culture. So I think that's definitely something that is, it's something that we focus on as part of organizational health, is having clarity in purpose and in your strategy, and making sure that that's understood and it pervades the entire organization.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that we've noticed that when we see these indicators of unhealthy or symptoms, we tend to go and get some temporary relief. We try to treat a symptom versus the source, and we do that. I think we do that in the medical world too, in our physical body, right? I I went to the drugstore yesterday and got some medicine because I had this incredible sinus headache, right? And it worked quickly. It calmed the symptoms of whatever the problem was, but something's causing that, right? It's not. I didn't treat the cause. I treat the symptom of it and got
Mm.
some relief. But you know what? It's going to come back again. And just like ignoring problems in our body and getting temporary relief, both coming from the military, man, we know the power of Motrin, right?
Vitamin M.
Top, pop some Motrin and move on. But we can't do that in the business world, right? We can't just try to get temporary relief because that's like putting blinders on that we don't see it. And um, you know, we've talked about the analogy of running a marathon, right?
Mm.
I'm not going to run a marathon with a broken ankle or a fever. Why? Because I may get I may be able to gut it out for a little while, but eventually, man, I'm going to collapse in pain and my body's just going to shut down. Well, that's the same thing in business. So, what do you think some solutions are for moving forward and not just treating the symptom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's at the heart of the concept that we're reinforcing, the idea of organizational health. And as we've described it in simple layman's terms, it's being effective today and viable into the future. You can surge today, and it's like going without sleep. You go
Right,
for a certain number of days without sleep. Eventually, you just become ineffective. It's not a matter of discipline or willpower. It just becomes the reality of physics and how our bodies function. So recognizing that you have to be able to adapt, survive, and thrive. And as you said, one of those symptoms is high turnover of personnel. If you're losing people, you got to ask yourself, is it something, I guess, why are they not staying? Do they not feel a sense of purpose? Do they not feel like they have the opportunity to grow within the organization? Do they feel like all the work that they're putting in is either not rewarded, or it's forcing them to operate in a way? It's like trying to sprint a marathon, you know, that you can only go for so long before it starts to show the effects, not only on yourself, but perhaps your family and in some of your other identity roles. So I,
right.
I think all of those things drives you to look at a longer term, more holistic view of what it means to have a viable organization, not just now, but into the future.
So, looking forward, I guess before we look forward, we got to figure out what is this sick organization look like. And I know we'll talk about it. That idea of the stagnation, and you mentioned several of these things, the silos, and why people leave because there's confusion, there's misalignment. I don't know why I'm here, and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is when, and we use the analogy that the metaphor of this tree here, because even though we're talking about the health and applying it to the human body, it's if I put two pictures of two human beings up here, they would look the same, but you don't know what's going on inside, right? You can't see the cancer from the outside. Just like an organization, I may not be able to see the cancer inside that organization looking from the outside, but from the inside. And this is the best analogy I could see, this dying tree, right? It's sick. The effects of the illnesses are causing frustration, exhaustion, and the people can't adapt. And we're not, our organizations, just like ourselves, we're not machines. We are a living, breathing body. And so, what do we need to do to fuel a healthy system? Right? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, can I take a quick step back and maybe add to a few of those
Absolutely.
indicators? Because I think some people who might be listening to this are going, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying conceptually, but how do I know? How do I know if we're having this kind of an issue? What are some of those indicators, and what's a good litmus test? Um,
I'm going to go back
one
to that slide.
one indicator is your ability to be successful requires crisis level energy every time. So if your
Explain
organization is
that.
in crisis mode constantly,
Mhm.
that's a precursor to burnout, and it's a significant indicator of the idea that perhaps the way you're running your organization is not taking into account the long-term viability. You're not doing things in a internally sustainable way. And I get it. I
Right.
mean, it's the market is changing, the environment's changing, the VUCA environment, the Bonnie environment. There's all kinds of acronyms that talk about how the environment is chaotic and it's constantly changing, and we have to be able to adapt. Um, so how do you build that into your long-term strategy? How do you build the ability to be adaptable in a way that it doesn't require you to be in crisis mode 24/7? Because that's
Mhm.
unsustainable. So how do you build in the competence that allows you to adapt and do that gracefully over an extended period of time? Other indicators: exhausted people, exhausted leaders, like we talked about, burnout, a culture that suppresses learning because it's all about results and we don't have time to invest in growth and learning and development. That's another indicator that you are constantly in what we would call in the military the tactical fight. You're constantly solving those immediate problems. And then another indicator is that your success in the organization depends on a few key individuals. And if one of those individuals is out for some reason or leaves for some reason, basically it's an indication of fragility in the organization. You're not resilient if you're dependent upon a few key individuals. You haven't built depth in your organization that allows you to surface creativity and to adapt, kind of top down and bottom up throughout the organization.
So what you're describing is that kind of that weakest link, right? And if one person leaves, does he take the institutional knowledge with them? And that's we see it all the time. And you said something else, some excuses that we hear often is, well, I don't have time to develop. We don't have the budget to develop because they're looking at the development as a debt or a cost and not an investment, right? So, I mean, and what we're trying to do is determine, what's the ROI on building a leader, building a strong organization, because it's hard to quantify. It really is, because we look at the profit and loss sheets and go, well, I spent this much money and only made this much money, but it's more to it than that. So, what are some of the returns of investment as an organization that we look at as a living body? What can we hope to see?
Well, I think there's some great parallels there, right? I mean, think about if you're constantly in crisis mode personally in your life every day, and you say, I don't have time to fill in the blank with any activity that's going to promote your long term health and wellness, right? I don't have time to cook healthy meals. I don't have time to get in some exercise. I don't have time to get fresh air. I don't have time to meditate. One of my favorite stories about a Zen master was, when Normally I meditate 20 minutes a day, but on those days that I'm really, really busy, I meditate 40 minutes a day. And it just highlights the importance, and the return on investment that comes from some of these very targeted, concise interventions that we know, or habits that we know
Mhm.
support long-term health. And I'm not saying it doesn't come with trade-offs, and I'm not saying it's not hard, when you've got all of these demands on your time, but I see it as an investment. There's a common phrase in investing that says pay yourself first. So if you're managing your time and you're prioritizing things from an investment mindset in terms of long-term viability, you've got to pay yourself first. And what are those high impact, low investment things that you can do that are really going to pay dividends for you, carrying that analogy forward, if you do them consistently over a period of time? And I think the same thing applies to organizations. If you're not even thinking about it in the terms of long-term viability, then you're not even thinking about what are those little high impact things that you can do to ensure that you are resilient as an organization, and that you're developing your people in ways that they feel valued, and they feel like they have something they can get out of being here. They're not stagnant, and they don't need to
Right.
leave, to relieve some of that stress and maybe get other opportunities for growth. So just having that view, that longer term strategic view of how your organization is going to be into the future, opens up just a whole different paradigm of how you might prioritize some of those high impact, low investment activities in your organization.
Well, we're coming up to the end of the year, and then January is going to hit us, and we all know what happens in January, right?
Oh yeah.
Everybody sets New Year's resolutions or New Year's goals, and businesses do the same thing. Well, I want my revenue to be here, but one of the things we challenge is, instead of setting goals, set new habits, right? That will in turn produce the outcomes that you're looking for, because we've all done it. We've all set that goal. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to strengthen by this much. And then, there's a reason why the most of the profit of gyms are made between January 1st and the 1st of March, because, you know, people pay for these gym memberships, but then they stop going because they didn't
Right.
create the habits, those small, reachable habits in the beginning. My son Logan just ran a half marathon a few weeks ago, and it was his first marathon. He's never done it. Now he's always been in good shape, but not running shape, because, like his
Mm.
dad, he doesn't like to run. Right? I I'd rather drive to where I'm going, but he was challenged by his father-in-law to, hey, compete in this half marathon. So he started a training program months ago, and he complained, he whined, he moaned, but eventually, because he got up every day doing those consistent small things that created habits that really paid off during the run. Right? The outcome he was looking for was, he wanted to run under a certain period of time, complete the race. And he did. He did it by 1 minute. All right. But that was his goal.
Right.
Had he not created those habits, then it wouldn't have happened. And had he not maintained the health of his body, his diet, and everything, it would not have happened. And so that's the concept we're talking about here, is thinking of your organization as that living body. And one of the things we do here at Azimuth is we kind of break it down a little farther for you as well. And looking at the three systems of organizational health: that awareness, that alignment, and that accountability. And we're going to kind of go through all three of these here really quick. But this kind of gives you a picture. That awareness, that's your nervous system. Okay. That's where everything is talking and sending the signals, and you understand what's going on. And the alignment, that's your skeletal system. I mean, think about, if something's out of alignment, how do you feel, right? And we see accountability as the muscular system that kind of holds everything together. So let's kind of dive into these individually real quick here. So the awareness, understanding what's going on internally and out and externally of the organization. And we talked about the silos. Well, the goal of this system is to get away from the internal gossip or that gut feeling and really rely on data. Why is that data important, JT?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, a big part of some of the one of the classes I'm taking on inquiry is centered around a research on evidence-based decision making, and how well organizations use evidence to make decisions and shape their processes and the outcomes in their organization. So if you're not using evidence, then what are you basing your decisions off of? Again, is it the gut feeling? Is it maybe a superficial understanding? A misinterpretation, perhaps a popular opinion. That can
Mm,
really drive people in a poor direction. So making sure that you've got the right information to be able to make those decisions, and that's one of the first questions associated with decision making. Is one, how much time do I have to make a decision? Do I need to make it immediately? And if I have time, what information do I need that's going to allow me to better decide between different options? And there's the concept of emergence. The more information you gather, you start to frame things and put them into patterns, and you start to build models, and then solutions just naturally emerge. And so that awareness is critical for effective decision making. And being an intelligence person, you know how important information and
oh,
intelligence is in driving operations.
absolutely. So with that concept, thinking about gathering the information and the data, first thing that pops to my mind right now is the use of AI today. So
Mhm.
we got people on both sides of the spectrum. It's like, no, we're not going to use it at all because it's going to take over the world. And then we've got some that just utilize it exclusively. So, and I believe there's a balance in there. AI is a powerful tool because of its ability to reach out and gather data that we can use. And frankly, it's a lot faster than I am. And so, because, I'm unreliable because I have a limited capacity. But utilizing the AI to help build the strategies and help look inside our nervous system of our organization and kind of identify where is there possible issues that we need to address. How do you see AI in playing a role in building awareness for the organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolving situation. You talk about the reliability of the responses you get from AI and how that's changed just in the last couple years. I
Mm-hmm.
think what we're seeing that's coming out is becoming more and more, I guess, trustworthy, or at least attributable. You can go back and go, hey, where did this come from? And so now if you build your prompts the right way or you use the right tools, you can see where this information is coming from. But, much like intelligence, where is this coming from? Who are we attributing it to? How confident are you in the particular source that you have? And then the age old maxim of leadership is trust but verify, right? I mean, at some
Yeah.
point you're still gonna have to go through that information and go, does it pass the sniff test? I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one of the concerns about the use of AI in organizations, is that they're so concerned with speed that they just take whatever comes out and they take it as gospel and as truth. And there's a significant amount of risk associated with that. But I do think these tools are going to continue to improve, and people are going to learn how to use them in a way that they can iteratively gather information and follow streams of thought and concepts to different conclusions at a much faster rate. But at some point, it's still going to take the human in the loop and judgment and going back and saying, is this complete? Does this make sense? What's missing? And there's a bias to AI there's almost I think they're finding confirmation bias in
Right.
AI, and that it wants to support whatever your line of thought is, and be like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, I think you're onto something. It's almost like I don't know, talking to your grandmother. Like she's always very supportive of everything. Doesn't mean that you're necessarily getting the best advice. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
I never
a
thought
takeaway.
I
Take
never
treat
thought
your
of
dad
it
like
that
your
way.
grandmother.
I never thought of it that way, but I did have to go in and start adjusting my prompts to say, look, I don't need my ego stroked. So don't tell me this is a great idea. Be honest with me. If this sucks, tell me it sucks.
So
Um,
sometimes I do.
so
I'm very deliberate about it, though.
right. So what? Before we move on to the next area, why is being aware of this, aware of our current situation, both as from an organizational standpoint and even as an individual? What is the importance of awareness in roles of growth?
Yeah, I mean, if you, I like the military model of decision making, the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Right,
Mm-hmm.
and awareness is observing and orienting. Do you have the right information, and how do you put that into context? How do you analyze it? How do you ensure the viability of it? If you if you can't observe and orient effectively, then everything you do based on that, in terms of your decisions and your actions, is not founded on reality. I think Stephen Covey mentioned the idea of climbing a ladder that's on the wrong wall, or running very quickly in the wrong direction. Like, it's not
Right.
about effort. It's not about how quickly you can move. It's, are you headed in the right direction? And that awareness allows you to have a clear understanding of what's going on inside your organization and outside your organization, and able to kind of fuse the two.
Absolutely. And this is why we use awareness as the foundational element of how we work with clients. Because if you don't know who you are and how you are and where you are, then you can't move forward. You can have a direction that you or a place you want to be, but you have to have a starting point. And where is that? Everybody's starting point is different. I wanted to add too, if anybody that's joining us live, I know a lot of people are going to watch this on the replay, but if you have any questions or comments, just drop them in the chat, whether you're on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we'll see them here. We'll answer them or respond to them as they come in. So the next area we want to talk about is the alignment. Okay, so alignment is that skeletal system. It's the structural integrity of our organization, and we want to make sure that there's a shared purpose, the shared values and mission, and that everybody's going in the right direction. And the problem that we see with silos is they go in different directions or they cause friction. It's like bone, scraping bone in the body. If you've ever had knee issues, you know what that feels like, right? Or a torn rotator cuff.
That's
It's
my
like
post-military retirement life.
exactly. If you retired from the military, you have some of these pains, but it can cause chaos because not everybody is rowing in the right direction. And if you've ever watched rowing, like on the Olympics, and you think, well, that's as easy. Everybody's just rowing, but all it takes is one of those rowers to be a millisecond off, and it can slow the boat or turn the boat. And when it comes to an organization, if you've got teams that are just slightly off, they're not aligned to your purpose, your mission, your values, and the intended outcomes, then you're not unified, and it can cause misdirection. What are some other things that misalignment can cause in an organization, JT?
Yeah, I mean, a concept that comes to mind for me is the idea of sub-optimization, where you've got small pockets of individual that are acting in a way that optimizes their local situation at the
Mm-hmm.
expense of the larger group. Like, they want to perform and they want their particular initiative to succeed, and are not as concerned as, whether or not their actions are perhaps impeding other initiatives. And so I think the idea of sub optimization is, it's an artifact of a culture that's not it's not trusting. It's not mutually supporting. It doesn't have a unified vision of
Mm-hmm.
where they want to go. And if you don't have that, and you're not committed to a goal and a purpose beyond your local situation, then that's naturally what you're going to do. Is you're going to focus on what is important to you and what makes you look good. And that's another, again, another indicator of uh, a lack of trust and a lack of comfort and belonging in an organization. If you're like, I have to perform at this level, I don't care about the impact, because if I don't, I know that I'm going to pay the price.
Right.
And that's another indicator of, I think, a dysfunctional culture.
Yeah, I know when I think of misalignment and chaos, our youngest son Ethan played soccer growing up. Right, he started out on the rec team and then got into the travel teams, and watching over the years these kids learn to play the game. Right, it was, you know, they had to learn the basic skills, but they're always looking down. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't move as a single unit. But as they got older and better, you start seeing it's like several boxes on the field were all moving simultaneously
Mm.
and effectively towards the goal, because now they were all aligned to their purpose to score a goal. They weren't a lot of individual talents. They were taking those individual talents and melding it to a team. And that's the same thing with an organization. We can have great talent on the organization, but you said it earlier, if I'm relying only on that talent, then I'm misaligned, because I'm not pulling everybody else in and to move in the same direction, and I can burn out those key players. But if we're aligned and moving as a unit, we're also functioning as a team in a full organization versus a company full of individual players. So I think alignment is so important, and some of the things we will see misalignment indicators of that with those pain points popping up again, when people are leaving, right? If they don't feel valued, or they don't feel that they're part of the organization moving in a clear direction, then we can see them leave, right? What are some other indicators maybe of misalignment, you think?
Well, I think the first thing I mentioned was that sub optimization, right?
Yeah.
That lack of trust, it conflict amongst teams, right?
Yes.
Because everybody feels like they're doing the right thing, and they can't understand why the other team is doing something different, and they see the world differently. So when you got different perspectives, different priorities, and different focus areas, and you start interacting with other folks, or perhaps you need to be mutually supporting in some way, like, hey, I need this particular product or this report or this support to be able to move forward with mine. And you're like,
Mhm.
well, that's not a priority for us. And that friction and that conflict is another indicator of a lack of alignment in purpose.
And let's want our listeners to know, when we say conflict, we mean unresolved conflict, an unhealthy conflict, because
Unhealthy. That's right.
conflict can be, well, is and should be healthy. That's where
Right.
innovation comes in, but yeah, when we don't address the unhealthy conflict, or we try to just look the other way, or we allow it to continue to fester, it's not like cheese and wine. It doesn't get better. it gets worse, and then it gets harder to resolve. And that conflict, like you said, that lack of trust, it can result in the blame game. And that's kind of what I want to jump on next, is that accountability. All right, now this is the muscular system. All right, these are the behaviors and the systems that allow us to perform at a level of excellence within our organization. We want to move from that blame culture to an ownership culture, meaning that abundance mindset. And this is where a lot of leaders, you want to make sure that you have the fitness in the organization, and that's that culture that supports a high standard and reinforces these behaviors, because we've said it before, every organization has a culture. It's either by default or design. So this is an opportunity to design the culture you want to see and moving from the blame. And when we start blaming one another, that's because we don't trust each other. We don't trust our systems we have in place. But let's talk about what ownership looks like, right? A lot of consultants and leadership gurus, they talk about the owners establishing ownership culture. But what is that? What does it mean? Is it taking blame or accepting blame? What, I don't know. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have things in place such as awareness and alignment, then accountability becomes healthy, because it doesn't naturally lead to blame. Accountability in the absence of awareness and alignment naturally leads to blame. So you've got to get those first two pieces in place. And one of my favorite leadership books is Extreme Ownership. And they talk about treating all of these experiences, and this is about culture. Do you see failure as an opportunity to grow and learn, or do you see it as something that must be eliminated? That we're all familiar with the zero defect mentality, right? I mean, I get it. Some people throw out there, well, we've got a no fail mission, right? Like, and that tends to become the norm, and no fail missions. That's great, but if that's the way you function all the time, then how do you grow? How do you learn?
Right.
How do you make mistakes and get better? Adaptation and growth is inherently based on making mistakes, reflecting, trying something new, and going through that cycle. So ultimately, if you are committed to a particular mission, you're committed to growth, then that failure becomes an opportunity to improve. And again, if you've got that clear awareness, you're like, oh, I see what happened here. I'm going to do this differently because I'm committed. And then you've got this upward spiral of growth that happens, as opposed to a downward spiral of blame and failure and ugly accountability and lack of trust. It just becomes friction and fog, and it just becomes dysfunctional.
No, absolutely. And I think when we stay with the scenario of the organization as a human body, if we compare it, then maybe we can think about our own health, right? When I'm sick, I'm sluggish, right? I can't do the things I want to do and should be doing. When I'm injured, maybe I'm limping. I have limited capacity, and that's the same thing with an organization. And that's why we're looking at three systems of awareness, alignment, and accountability. And aligning them to our nervous system, our skeletal system, and the muscular system, because it inhabits the entire body of the organization and allows us to move from a stagnation or chaos into a continuous growth. And we talk about that all the time, JT, where growing as an organization or as an individual is not a one-time deal. It's not a Band-Aid or a fix. It is a continuous process. And in between and in that process, there's several things, that have to happen. But I want to go back to our tree scenario here. And, on the left-hand side here, we see that what happens if we have an unhealthy tree. It's damaged by the environment. It's by lack of care. Eventually it's going to fall down. It's going to rot and decay. But if we want to get to that growth side, right, where the tree is growing and flourishing, and it's got strong leaders, clear communication, we've reduced the turnover, and we have a sustained success, not periodic. There has to be something in the middle. That's that journey that we have to take to get there, and some interventions that may come into play. Just like we go to the doctor, and I'm a type 2 diabetic, and I control it with diet and exercise and some medication. But when I first found out, I go to the doctor and he goes, look, here's the fact. This exists. We can beat this, but here's some interventions you have to you have to put in place. You have to diet, exercise, and we're going to give you this medication. And eventually you can keep it down, right? You can stay healthy and have a healthy life. But what a lot of organizations do when we talk about these interventions, and you mentioned it before, well, I don't have time. I don't, or maybe I don't believe it. Maybe I don't believe I'm unhealthy. Well, then it's going to start showing up in other indicators. So let's talk a little bit about that growth process, or that healthy process of getting from one state to the next. And here's some of the things that we at Azimuth we bring to the table. We talk about that organizational health assessment. So this is kind of, your triage, right? We're going in, we're figuring out what is your current state. Remember, that's the awareness. This is a diagnostic tool. You go to the doctor. Hey, doc, I got a cough. I've got this pain in my shoulder. Right? I may take an X-ray. I'm going to take blood work. I'm going to find out what's going on. So that's the same thing here. Is what we do is we take that organizational health assessment to give us an idea of where your organization is. JT, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are what you see underneath the organizational health assessment are the three components that we would be looking at primarily, in addition to immediate short-term organizational effectiveness. But these three I would see as more of your long-term viability mechanisms and indicators. Mm-hmm. So that assessment is we're going to look at, hey, what is the quality of your leadership? How ready are your leaders to grow? Do they have the right mindset? Do they feel like they have the resources? Are they motivated? Do they feel like there's support for them to grow as leaders? Are they given the opportunities to learn? And is it acceptable in your culture to spend time on personal and professional development of yourself and your people? Or is it all about the bottom line? And if you're not on task today, that's solving some helmet fire, then then you're wasting your time. And again, that leads to burnout, and it leads to people who don't feel like they have the opportunity to grow and achieve new things in an organization. Culture and alignment support, that all of the things associated with culture. Our assessment, I think, has about nine to 10 different indicators of what healthy culture is. And so we can go in and do an assessment and say, hey, how well are these things in place? Things like communication. How well do people in the organization believe that communication takes place, right? So it's an indication of how well do you support clarity, awareness, and alignment. Right? So that culture, you can see how the indicators of culture all contribute to awareness, alignment, and accountability. And then the bottom one we talked about earlier. If you don't have a quality strategy, you don't have clarity on your purpose, you don't know what's important to your organization in terms of what you value and what you prioritize, you don't know what your vision is for the next 2, 3, 5 years. I think a lot of people are seeing strategic visions are having to necessarily shrink in duration to shorter terms than some of your traditional 5 to 10 year strategies because of the pace of change in the environment. So our health assessment can come in, look at these different factors, and give you an idea of where are you headed. Where do you have your strengths? Where do you have your weaknesses? Again, what are those indicators? What are those symptoms that will
Mm-hmm.
give you some leading indicators of problems in your long-term viability of your organization?
No, absolutely. And we talked a little bit here about the leadership development. These are all things that we do, but why is it important? We believe everything rises and falls on leadership, and leadership matters constantly. It's not just, hey, I need leadership for this event, this activity, this action, this strategy. It permeates throughout the entire organization. So if you come in with the concept of, well, everybody needs to be developed as a leader, right? And it is a developmental skill. It's not you're not born leaders, right? No, all leaders are born, but that doesn't mean that you're born to lead. And just like we had in the military, they have a very structured and intentional development program for developing leaders, right? You come in as a young second lieutenant, then I'm not going to put you in charge of a division because you don't have the skill set. You don't have the attitude yet that needs to be developed, the knowledge necessary for it, and you don't have any indicators or displayed behaviors that would lead me to believe that you're capable of leading something larger. And same thing within an organization. And this is something what we've talked about recently is, nobody certifies their leaders. And what I mean by that is, if you want to be a CPA, you need a certification, right? If you want to be a cybersecurity professional, you need a certification. You want to be a wealth management professional, you need a certification. These certifications tell your potential clients or your employers that you have met certain competencies and behaviors that lend to the ability to perform in that area. We don't do that with our leaders, right? We promote them and hope for the best. And one of the things we're doing here at Azimuth is we're trying to change that, right, in our leadership development program. But all of that is tied into making sure that we have cultural alignment and support within the organization. Because it doesn't matter how great a leader you are, if you're not aligned to the organizational values and mission and vision, then you're not going to be effective. So with that said, let me go to the next slide here. I want to give everybody the opportunity. What's the next step? If you want to understand what your organization's, vitals are right now, schedule with us a complimentary vitals check. I'm gonna drop the QR code here. This will take you to our website, and you can connect with us there. And we would be more than happy to give you a complimentary vitals check. No questions asked, no pressure. We just want to give you an idea of where your organization sits right now and what could we do to help further that. So let me get rid of the slides there real quick. And so JT, I'm going to leave that up in case people want to do it. So what would you like everybody to know as we close out today on organizational health and vitality?
Yeah, I think when we talked about having this conversation, I said, well, what is important about this paradigm, this model, this idea of organizational health? And it's not unique in the consulting world. There are other consultancies that speak to organizational health. I think what's unique about what Azimuth is doing is we define exactly what does organizational health look like in practice. What are the components that we have found, in our research and in our experience that lend itself to that long-term viability balanced with the effectiveness today. And so it's a systems approach that has discrete elements that we can measure and we can influence. You can go in and you can do that check and say, hey, we're seeing something that might be a concern. And here's some things you might be able to try out or things that we can help you with so that this indicator doesn't turn into a chronic problem that ultimately undermines your ability to adapt and to thrive into the future. So what do I like about the organizational health model? One, it's simple. It makes sense. It's intuitive. It's something we can connect with. We understand what it means to be healthy as a person. Organizations they're organic entities made of human beings. They're complex adaptive systems. And so this particular model encourages people to get out of the tactical, out of the immediate helmet fires and thinking a little bit more strategically and say, hey, what strategic mindset do we need here? What's the big picture? What's the long term? How do I make sure that we can continue to do this into the future? And then the second thing is it creates a framework and an approach for people to address some of those things that people talk about and they intuitively know are important, but that's really hard to put your finger on. They're intangible. Things like culture, things like leadership. So we have the ability to go in and say, this is what we know has been proven to be essential for an effective culture. This is what we know is what an effective leader looks like at different levels of responsibility. And we've got a framework of developing these competencies over time in a way that's going to get you to more effective leader behavior. So to summarize, I guess the why that this is important is it's a simple model that does those two things. It brings you out of the tactical into the strategic, and it allows you to take things that are ephemeral and hard to put your finger on, and we can really make them, come up with practical solutions that are going to help that organization be viable into the future and make those high impact, short, consistent investments over time that'll ensure that health and viability into the long term.
Absolutely. And and I couldn't have said it better. So that's why I let JT do it. But in a nutshell, just because you don't see a problem doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so that's where I think the awareness comes in first. And that's why we put it as the foundation of all of our programs is we need to be aware of where state you're in right now. Once we determine that, then we can move forward to growth, and we can be your guide on this journey to organizational vitality. So again, if you have any questions, reach out to us. If you have any comments, reach out to us. We'd love to have a conversation with you, just to find out what you need. Nothing, no pressure, no hype. Just reach out and have the conversation. And want to wish everybody happy holidays, Merry Christmas as the season is upon us. I hope everybody has a safe holiday season. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.